we're being the full number of the disciples, and said, "It's not right that we should give up preaching the word of God to serve tables." And then that's where the deacons come from. Staying in your lane. How many offices did the ARP church have? Ministers can't answer. Sorry, can't look at Kent. Who's all excited? How many offices do we have? Do you even know what I'm talking about? No.
Three.
Which church is he from? He's from Indian Church. Yeah, that's what I said. So I almost brought a little jar. If you'll call it the curse jar, and if you use that TE word, you're going to have to pay $5. We're not going to do that, though. I'll be nice. We have three, right? Somebody said three right here. Our brothers from Little Rock. What are you flying back there, Kent? What?
I just explained it.
I'm coming to it, Kent. Okay, hold on. So we have three offices. We have minister, elder, deacon. Those are our three. There's differences between these. Why? The real issue is what do you do with elder and minister? They're very similar in some ways, very different in others. Think about the difference between minister and elder. Ministers are most often called outside of their congregation. How many of you know a minister who was raised up in a congregation and was the minister there? Anybody? I went to seminary with one fellow, John Olson, at Church Creek in Charleston. That congregation said, "You're called to be a minister." They sent him to seminary, and he became their pastor. I know lots of people, and that's the only one I can think of. Okay? Often we are called from outside. They have a call to perform, to preach, and do much of the teaching ministry and leading of the ministry of the church. The elder has a similar role, but elders are generally from the congregation, right? I think you have a provisional elder, James, over here, I believe. So you can have provisional elders, but generally, churches, the elders of the church come from that congregation. There's a couple of special cases where that's not true, but generally, that is true. The deacon's role is to care for the physical needs of physical ministry of the church and to free up the elders and the minister to pray, teach, and lead the church spiritually. That's a little oversimplified, but did that help? Is that good? Kent, did that approve? I'm always looking for Kent's approval. In my experience, we do not often work well together as ministers, elders, and deacons. That doesn't mean we don't get along. Don't hear me say we don't get along, because often we get along great. But we don't, it's like rowing a boat. You like crew? Have you ever seen crew racing? Harold O.J. Brown taught us in seminary. He was in a Harvard crew. And the key to crew is 4 people or 6 people, how many people on the boat, putting their oars in and pulling at the exact same moment. If you've got 3 guys pulling at one time and another guy pulling at another, you're not going to get the speed. In fact, you're probably going to slow down. And so in a sense, elders, deacons, and the minister need to be pulling together in their lane, in their responsibilities for the church to do well. And I find that we often don't do that. Some of that is we don't know what we're supposed to be doing. And we get in each other's way. There's several errors. We can look at the session. We can look at officers, we can look at ministers in ways that are just improper or incorrect. Let me give you some examples. Some people see the session as a board of directors. You know what I mean by that? The session comes in once a month to oversee and direct the work of the church. Tell the pastor and deacons what to do. That is not a right model of what we as Presbyterians believe the session is. You can find a session, and I find this very true. Y'all think about your own situation. It'd be interesting to ask the elders what they think and then ask the deacons what they think, because it might be different. One error is that the session is too involved in the deacon's work. They're called to be elders, but they keep doing the deacon's work. And you know what? I get that. Deacon's work is concrete often. We need to build a ramp. We need to fix this. We need to change the light bulb. By the way, one of my spiritual gifts is changing light bulbs. I'm very good at that. And you know what, the pastor, there's times you do that, right? I really do not, when you say lanes, there are times that, you know, the pastor needs to be at the work day. There's times that, you know, if they're gonna, listen, when the ladies needed something high moved or changed or done something, come get me. That's what the Lord gifted me with that, right? There's a difference between helping and always doing. I'm getting ahead of myself. If the session does the diaconal's work, it leaves the diacon, leaves the deacon. I get some water here. Hold on. My water right there. If the session does all the deacons' work, what are the deacons going to do? They don't do a whole lot. You want to discourage somebody? Let them first come to church. They've been there 4 months. Let's make him a deacon. And now let's, as a session, do the work we told him he was supposed to do. Discourage them. If you go back to Acts 6, the deacons are there to free you up as elders to preach, teach, and do spiritual things. You don't need to be doing just the physical things. That shouldn't be your focus. At my church, we had the Billy Graham Library, which is in Charlotte, not far away. They had a seminar on church safety. This is something we all should be thinking about, church safety, security. You talk about a bunch of old white men who got excited. They got all into that. They got comms. They got, you know, we have our own comm system at the church, right? So you could just, you know, press a button. It's like, you see that guy over there? What's he doing? You know? I mean, they would go shooting. We had, I accused them one time. I was like, do we have a SWAT team now? I'm not sure. And finally, I looked at him and I said, I wish I could get you this excited about Jesus. I think I hurt their feelings. But it's easy to get excited about those kind of things. It's easy to be able to go and deal with the concrete stuff, right? The church needs to be painted. It's painted, look at that. Well, we need more commitment. We need to reach the lost. You know, those are days you go home trying to do those things, and sometimes you don't see where the Lord's working. We need to grow our church spiritually. And there's days that you go home and go, I have no idea if we've gone forward or backwards. It's hard being an elder. It's hard being a minister. I think there's another issue that comes in and why this happens is sometimes how many of you, at First Lancaster, we had a plaque for deacons emeritus and elders emeritus. You know how many deacon emeritus we had? James, great man, James Caskey. He'd knock on my door every day and like, got your coffee made. Later in life, it would be Tuesday, and he had made Sunday coffee. We'd have to say, James, it's not Sunday. You know why he was a deacon emeritus? He refused to let them make him an elder because he said, I'm not qualified to do that. That's not my giftedness. I'm a deacon. Everybody else who had been a deacon had become an elder. I don't know how we do that. I don't know what we do with that. But we have to acknowledge ourselves that there's a difference of giftedness there. Now, I'm not saying that you should be an elder or a deacon. It's not one way or the other. But I'm not sure everybody who's a deacon needs to be an elder. And this might even be more controversial. Some people don't need to be a deacon before they're an elder. I got in trouble with this at my church because I made a guy an elder before he was a deacon. And I didn't realize that was an unwritten rule. I didn't care. I just looked at him and said, I love y'all. He would make a horrible deacon. He has no gifts to be a deacon. And let's be honest, he's already doing the work of an elder. He worked in the hospital, he visited, he was teaching, he was doing those things. So think about that. The relationship between elders and deacons. There's a side of this too that you can go the other way. you can look at deacons as just industrial engineers, which is a fancy word for janitors they use today, right? And you can treat them almost like hired help that you don't pay. All right, the deacons have to open the door and lock the door. They have to take up the offering. They have to count the offering. They got to fix things. If this is not fixed, it's the deacon's fault. Being a deacon is more than that. Think about Acts 6. That's where we find deacons, right? What happens in Acts 7? Who was he? Should give you pause about becoming a deacon, right? They didn't kill him because he didn't unlock the door. Now, some of us pastors, we might want to kill our deacons for other reasons, but that's not why they did it. Excuse me. Anyway, it got to be more than just, there's a spiritual side to being a deacon. It's not just an office of service in the sense of physical things that have no bearing. There's ways in which the ministry is done, the physical ministry is done, benevolence. Your deacons do benevolence? Or does your session still have his finger in that? Okay, this is not a quiz, you can answer me. Tim, your deacons do benevolence? Who does benevolence? Do y'all do benevolence? Okay. Let's start there. Do y'all do benevolence? Yeah. Who does it? Is that fairly common in Mississippi Valley? Kent, do you know what benevolence is? Okay.
I'm being benevolent to you right now.
Okay. Maybe. I mean, one of the things, if you take away the benevolence from the deacons, you're taking away the thing, one of the ministries they have is dealing with those things. And as far as I'm concerned, I want the deacons to do it. People come to the door all the time. They're going to the deacon. I mean, I don't mind talking to them, but, pastor can't do everything. If you want to waste your day as a pastor, open the door and start talking to somebody. I don't mean that's wasted. Sometimes those are great, but some of these people will just take up your whole day trying to get $100 or $50 or something. Does that happen in Mississippi? I'm off my notes here, so I'm a little. There's been times that I have helped people and it has been marvelous, and other times I've walked home and gone, I got nothing done today because I was with that person. You got to be real careful. That's not staying in your lane. That's what deacons are for, in my opinion. There's another error that deacons, again, are junior elders. It's just a training ground to see if they're going to be good elders. There's a difference in the office. There's another view. This is rare, but one I've been dealing with recently in our presbytery. We have a minister who's telling his elders that it is their job to do all the work. They're to do all the visitation. They're the ones to be doing the evangelism. He just sits back and orders everything and preaches. I don't think that's the right vision either. What I'm trying to say here, I'm not trying to give an overall comprehensive idea of how it can go wrong, but just to give the idea of how it does go wrong, of how we get in each other's way and we don't have an idea of what each group is supposed to do as officers. Excuse me. The key to avoiding these and other errors is to stay in your lane. A few years ago, I figured out that based on a 40-hour a week, I was paid a certain amount of money per hour. I was surprised. Now, there's a reason I did that. But I want you to think about that. If you pay your pastor a certain amount of money, which you all do, you want to get your money's worth what you're paying. It does not make good sense to have, as part of your pastor's duty, to cut the grass. Because unless you're not paying them a whole lot, it's a lot cheaper to go find some kid or somebody else to cut the grass, right? Better value. Pay the pastor to do what he can do and only he can do. Most of us would not pay a CPA to balance our checkbook. Why is that? Somebody's going to say, well, I do pay somebody to do it. Well, you've got more money than I have. Why would we not pay a CPA, who obviously would be better at it than us, to balance our checkbook? Some of you young guys, If you don't know what the checkbook is, Google it, okay? But you old guys like Charles, would you do that? No, why? Because what?
Costs too much.
It costs too much, and you can do it yourself. One of the things that irritates me about churches, this is a freebie, not in my notes, is when churches pay people to do what they can do. If you're going to hire somebody in your church, you're going to hire a director, a children's director, or something like that, make sure they're going to expand the ministry, not just make it easier for you to not do the ministry. That make sense? Is that clear? Because I'm not on the notes here. My point here, though, is you've got a minister. The minister needs to do the things that ministers do. What he's trained to do. The elders need to do the things that they can do to support that, the spiritual things. And then the deacons need to take away those nagging things that they can do. And we need to stay in our lane. You want your pastor again to be doing the things that he is trained to do that no one else can do or do as well. This means sermons, teaching, leading, what I call need visitation. Just going to visit people, all of you should be able to do that, right? But going into a crisis, going to the hospital sometimes, doing counseling, that's where the minister has unique skills. You want them to be able to have the time to do those things. And as a result, the pastor needs to stay in his lane and not simply try to do the things that the elders are supposed to do or the deacons are supposed to do. In a sense, if the pastor will stay back and do the things he is uniquely qualified to do and called to do, and that only in many cases he can do or do well, it forces, in a sense, the elders to do their part as the session, the administration, shepherding to some degree, and even teaching. This is where I disagree with the two-office view, or even the 2.5 office view. There's a lot of people who think that elders and ministers are the same office and they have the same abilities and responsibilities. There's a lot of overlap. But I don't think elders do everything equally as well. That's not been my experience. We as pastors, we go to school for 3 to 4 years. We get a very well-rounded professional degree in how to do ministry. We might not be good at some parts of it, but we're trained to do the whole thing. Elders get very little training by comparison. How many of you have a degree from a theological seminary? Not you. I see. What did I say? Elders. And then I've got 2 ministers.
I wasn't listening.
Okay, well that's good. At least you're honest. You wasn't listening. Now, I will say, if I can just take a moment, if you would like to get a degree from Erskine Seminary, we would be glad to help you. We have this instead. But the reality is, most of our officers have little to no training. Is that fair? I mean, I'm glad we're here today, but me doing 4 talks is not going to equal the same thing as 3 years of seminary. So there's a difference there. There's a difference in training. And so to expect an elder to do everything that a pastor can do or is expected to do is not feasible. But at the same time, the elders do have gifts and responsibilities. And often I think there are too many pastors that are willing to do too much and not require the session to do parts of the job that they can do that we don't have to do. It's often the pastor who needs to stay in their lane and let the elders do their job. Now, some of the pastors are going to say, well, the elders don't do their job. Well, as one of my friends in ministry said, sometimes letting things fall apart ain't the worst thing in the world. Then it makes you come to a crisis and you have to say, okay, here's where we're at, what we're going to do. But elders have a responsibility. And they need to be meeting that responsibility, not to be deacons, not trying to be pastors, but in the administration, shepherding, and teaching to some degree. Now you say, well, I can't teach. Okay. Maybe you're not going to be an every Sunday school teacher. Maybe that's not your gift. I had one elder who was a great elder. He was good. He was faithful. He knew his stuff. He was the most bashful and shy person you've ever met. The thought of sending him out by himself to visit somebody, that just didn't happen. Because it wasn't his gift. And then there's other people that I could send out and they were just marvelous. Marvelous. Teach me to put my hands in my pocket. Sorry. They were just marvelous at it. So where am I going with this? Finding that balance. I don't want to come out and say, here's what the pastor does. Here's what the elder does. Because it's going to be different in every church. Hopewell and New Albany, how far are y'all apart, Charles?
5, 6 miles.
Yeah, that's physically apart, but in ministry style, totally different, right? New Albany is one of the biggest churches in your presbytery. Hopewell's a small little rural church. The way that's going to function, the way the elders work, it's going to be totally different. Y'all don't have an installed pastor, do you? Or do you? Charles? Do y'all have an installed pastor?
Same supply.
Yeah. And of course, they have all kinds of stuff at New Albany. And I'm not saying, and both are great, but they're different. And so the work that the pastor at New Albany does might be a little different than the work the pastor at Hopewell does. I'm going to get into that in a second. Let me see.
You may be gonna address this, Dr. Sands, but are you gonna address the accountability issue with any one of those offices or all of
In what way?
them? And who accountable?
I think it depends on what the problem is. We should hold each other accountable in an ideal world, right? Again, this is not from, you can't come from on high here. Pastor can't come in and say, you elders, y'all are not doing your job, and this is blah, 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 blah. Fill out your data form, because you're gonna be leading, right? This is where you have to come alongside, and you've got to be together. You've got to be coming together, you know, rowing together, and have that conversation. I think maybe accountability is not the right word that I would use. I would say, how are you going to divide this up? There are certain things the pastor's going to do, right? We know he's going to preach, probably lead worship. I think, Kit, you have elders. I think I looked at the thing. You've got some elders that help with worship. It said an elder in the thing that he was reading something at worship.
Right, yeah. I'm that elder.
You what?
I'm that elder.
Oh.
But it's it's for the future when it actually does happen. I'm vision casting.
I'm really glad I didn't bring that cuss jar up. Yes, Tim, please take this someplace else.
Not to take my elder's question away from him, but I do think we've had this problem, and it's not unique to our presbytery. We have had issues in the past in churches where there was a problem with the minister. Minister, it might be a family issue or something along those lines, but I don't think the sessions always know how to handle that. The default is going to be to try to protect the pastor and his family. You alluded to that a little bit, or the pastor in the situation, you alluded to that earlier, but I'm not sure. And we, and Minister and his work has begged the churches to seek the help of the presbytery in the matter, but I still think there's a uncertainty about what to do in that situation.
Thank you, that helps me. Let me be very blunt here. Something was told to me many years ago. The sheep cannot help the shepherd. The shepherd should not go to the sheep. If you're having a problem, if your pastor's having a problem, he needs to go to his church, which is the presbytery. If you don't know what I mean by that, ask your pastor. Our church is the presbytery. We are members of the presbytery, not the local church. Pastors are people. We have children. Y'all have had children, right? We have difficulties. We have struggles. And while there needs to be, at times, there can be and should be a caring for the pastor, there also comes a time where the pastor needs help. And that really needs to come from the presbytery. Does anybody disagree with that? I mean, that's why I'm hearing you saying your minister of work saying, please come to us to help you. What is it?
Depends on the situation.
It does a little bit. It depends on the severity. But when it comes down to where it is becoming a problem, it needs to go to the presbytery. Because it'll split the church. Because I've seen this happen. It happened in one of our churches in Catawba. The minister and his wife were having a serious issue. The wife left. The session tried to mediate that, tried to do the counseling, tried to bring them together. You know what? Guess what happened? Can you guess what happened? Half the church supported the pastor, half the church supported the wife. And it's just now getting over that. Thank God it's getting over it. That's what presbytery is for. Where are we? Sorry. I'm trying not to draw too hard a line because I don't want you to go back and say, well, the preacher does this, and the deacon does this, and the elders do this. You need to work through it. Hear that. You need to sit down and have that discussion. Here's the ministry before us. Here are the general things that we know we're supposed to do. Where are the lines of the lane? Maybe it's a little blurry. At Hopewell, it's going to be blurry, right? Because everybody's pitching in together. At New Albany, which is that's the biggest church in the presbytery, right? Sort of, pretty much. Probably. It's going to be different at Hopewell. Let me give you some examples. My first church was Smyrna ARP Church. 7 to 8 years I was there, I did the bulletin. Okay, why did I do the bulletin?
Didn't want to hire a secretary.
That's sort of it. I was the only one who had a computer. That's how long ago it was. They finally hired a secretary because they realized it would help me. Probably half the time, I wrote the session minutes. I shouldn't have done that. You know why I did that? I had a computer. And we didn't have anybody really gifted. I had a couple clerks that were really gifted at it, and they did it. But some of the clerks, it was just like, please help me. It was just easier to do it. It wasn't like we had massive minutes at Smyrna anyway. Guess who unlocked the church every Sunday and turned all the lights on and made sure the air was on?
Deacons.
No. No. It was me. What we also found is the elders were very, very supportive. They let me decide to do whatever the work I wanted to do. They were all for me doing whatever work I wanted to do. And they had my back for most of it. And part of that, too, is the nature of Smyrna. My elders all worked. Most of them worked from sun up to sundown. I had one of the best elders I've ever had was in water. And he literally got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and he was up on the phone till 11 o'clock at night. And almost every Sunday, he fell asleep in church. And he was mortified by it. But I told him, I said, Mike, tell me another time outside of your bedroom when you're going to sleep that it's quiet and you're still. And he wasn't. They were doing what they could do. It was the nature of the church. Deacons often crossed over into the elders' work because they were frustrated with the elders not doing anything. One of my favorite experiences, I say that sarcastically, was that I got an unplanned review of my performance as a minister by the diaconate. Which is not generally what they're supposed to do. It's a very different world. I go to First Lancaster, city church. Most of the Smyrna was blue collar. First Lancaster is very middle class, kind of middle management, if that makes sense. I never had to unlock the door, turn on the lights, or make sure the heat and air was on. Mainly because we had an elder who got there before even the deacons get there. And we kept saying, Butch, you got to let the deacons do their job. But the deacons never could get there before he got there. He didn't sleep well. And then we would have those days where Butch was out of town or was sick or for some reason didn't come. And then we'd walk in, church is dark, air conditioning not on, all that, because the deacons had just given up trying to get there. I had a secretary at First Lancaster. That freed me up. The elders were much more involved. We had committees. They were at church. We had a shepherding plan. We had the church divided up into 3 shepherding teams. Deacons had a group of men that would meet once a month or as needed to go out and do small odd jobs. So we had much more of a focused, organized ministry. And you can see there that I was freed up to be the pastor. You had elders who were involved doing the work of elders, and you had deacons who were doing their work. If you go to First Presbyterian Church Columbia, which is the largest church in our denomination, 2,000, 3,000 people, they've got 7 ministers, I think. They've got a staff that's bigger than probably half the churches in Mississippi Valley. And that's not because your church is small, their staff's that big. That's a whole different world. There, the pastor's not going to the hospital a whole lot, senior pastor, right? He's preaching, he's writing sermons, he's casting vision, he's leading the 48-member session, right? It's a very different world. As you go back to your local church, you need to understand the needs and realities of where you're at. Size plays a part in it, location plays a part in it, giftedness plays a part in it. You could be at a small church and have excellent, well-trained, experienced, and mature elders who get it and are doing the work. You can get a larger church and have elders who don't have a clue what they're doing. Again, this is where you need to sit down, pastor, session, diaconate, and figure out how to do this work. Where are the lanes and how to go forward. Does that make sense? Is that too simplified? I'm not going to say that's easy. Also, this is not a 10-minute conversation. And it's not just a one-time conversation, it's a constant conversation. You have to evaluate it. How are we doing? Where do we need to do this? It might be that the pastor, the elders come to the pastor and say, look, we're trying to do this. We don't know what we're doing. And the pastor has to come over and help. Or maybe the elders say, we've got this, go do that. But you've got to have that relationship. And you've got to avoid the territorial battles that come sometimes in the church. You've got to be on the same team. And that's got to be very, very clear. So understand your needs and abilities. Most of your pastors probably aren't able to sit in their office all day and just write sermons, cast vision, and deal with the session. They're going to be in the office, but they're also going to have to be out with the people. Elders in a small church, you might not spend your time doing church committee work. At Smyrna, we had no committees. We had a committee of the whole, as they call it. If we had an issue, the session met. But they might still be very active, praying, teaching, and visiting with the people. Generally, in the smaller churches, the work is shared. The lanes are closer together. And the lines are, I think, a bit more blurred. Everyone has to pitch in and do the work. The larger church, the more the lanes need to be clear, more defined, so that you can get the work of your office done and stay out of the way of the others doing their work in their lane. And my advice here is simply this: go home and figure it out. Talk. Don't simply keep doing what you've always done because that's what you've always done. Have the conversation. What does the minister need to do? What do we need to be doing? What do the deacons need to be doing? Does that make sense? You get that? You agree with that? Even if you come back and say, we like what we're doing now, and everybody's like, yeah, we're doing good, that's still a good conversation to have. But I think you're not going to go there. I think when you start having the conversation, you can start having the conversation and saying, we're missing this. We're not covering that. How are we doing evangelism as officers? Christian education. Who is doing this and that? Where are these things being covered? Those are the conversations you have to have. Go back and read the chapters. Get you a copy of the FOG. You know what the FOG is? In the PCA, they have the BOC. We have the aptly named FOG, form of government. Go get you a copy. You can go to arpchurch.com or www.arpchurch.org, and it's on there in the resources. And read the chapters about ministers, elders, and deacons, where it says this is what you should do, and have a discussion about it. There are many excellent resources that you can read together at at Lancaster. We read several things together and had officer training as officers. We used Tim Whitmer's book, The Shepherd Leader. Anybody read that? That's good, isn't it? Only one of you. Come on.
Say it again.
Tim Whitmer's The Shepherd Leader. He's from Westminster, and he talks about leadership and what it means to shepherd. I think a lot of our guys said, we don't have a clue what it means to shepherd, and they found it very, very helpful. And here's the thing, bring your deacons in. Yes, we're going to talk about the elder's office, but in understanding the elder's office, I think it gives clarity to the deacon's office and to the minister's office as well. William Stills, The Work of the Pastor. Some of y'all read that. If you want to know what the work of the pastor is, it's short. Read that. You're not a pastor, you're an elder, you're a deacon. Read that to help you know what the pastor's supposed to be doing. Alexander Strauch, is that how you say that? Strauch. He's written a couple books. One's on biblical eldership, and the other's Paul's Vision for Deacons. But there's many, many resources out there that can help you understand what it means to be a minister, elder, or deacon. You need to be looking at those. We live in an age where there are more information than we have time to read, right? We need to take advantage of that information. Why do you need to do this? In my experience, we've never really talked about what the ministry is. We just go do it, right? You call a minister in, you might organize a few things, but you never get to the basic understanding of what you're trying to do. When I went to Erskine College, played basketball. I played basketball at a football school, if you know what I mean. So all the football players were there. We had a football coach and a basketball coach. I didn't learn a whole lot about the game of basketball. When I got to Erskine, we played a man-to-man defense. And we had a philosophy of what we wanted to do. And that doesn't sound earth-shattering, but for an 18-year-old kid, this was like, wow. So you don't just stop them from scoring, right? You know, we divided the court in half. And then we divided another half. So you had quadrants on the half court. And our goal was when the ball went in one quadrant, we wanted to push it down to the baseline and never let it out. And pressure, 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 pressure. That was our goal, and that was our method to get the job done, stopping them from scoring, playing defense. We need to have a philosophy. We need to have an understanding of what we're doing, and you need to have that conversation. And there's many, many resources out there that can help you do that. But you need to do that with the pastor. You need to do that with elders. You need to do that with deacons. You need to be all on the same page as best as you can, because then you're pulling together, and you won't be in each other's way. If the church is going to be healthy, it's got to start at the top. I don't find a lot of churches that outgrow their pastor, their session, and their deacons. Do you agree with that?
What does that mean?
You don't find churches that become more spiritually mature than their officers. Do you agree with that? Any examples of that you can think of where I'm wrong? There might probably be one, but generally, as a general rule, doesn't happen. No? Okay. Good. I'm glad when I ask, am I wrong, and y'all don't say I'm wrong. That makes me feel better about myself. Anyway, let's stop there. Questions? Comments? Thoughts? Come on, more questions. More detail if you want it.
Who do you believe should really be in charge of setting up for the Lord's Supper?
I don't care. I'm sorry. Honest. Who do you think, Ken?
Well, I just know how it's done here and how it's been done for 50 years. That's what I know.
I know that in my first church, it was the deacons. At Lancaster, I.W. Caskey and his wife set up communion for 50-something years. And then as they got older, I finally said, one day I.W. is going to die and we're not going to have a clue what we're doing about setting up communion. And so another couple came in and did it. They baked the bread, they did the whole thing. I don't know that it, I mean, all right, let's play a game. Tim, who does it at your church?
My wife bakes the bread and an elder and I set it up on Sunday morning.
There's Tim being too involved again. Charles, who does communion, who sets up the communion at y'all's church?
Elders do most of the tenant.
Okay. French camp,
Sometime a female will do it.
French camp.
The baker makes the bread and delivers the loaf.
Who actually, you're talking about setting up the communion, the physical setting up.
Typically, we have a couple of elders that help us out. Occasionally, I'll do it myself.
I think this is a good example of, I'm not sure the Bible says who has to do that. I'm not sure the form of government says who has to do that. This is a great place to figure it out, right?
Just along those lines, in a previous congregation, not Brighton, the people at Brighton are wonderful, okay? So I never
There's no
said-
problems at Brighton.
The fact they have two elders here doesn't have anything to do with it. No, in a previous congregation, we did the Lord's Supper monthly, and one of the things we did was we opened it up to the congregation. Anybody, they could do a sign-up sheet and they could bake bread for that month. Which sounds like a wonderful idea on paper until I got into an argument with an elder about bread recipes. Yeah, I'm serious about that.
You know, this is funny, but it's not. Because what we fight about in the church is often that kind of stuff, right?
Absolutely.
We're not gonna fight about the deity of Christ. We're not gonna fight about things that really matter. We're gonna fight about what color to paint the closet in the women's restroom, what shade of green, right? That's what we fight about. And that's one of the things you have to avoid, but yeah, the bread recipe though is really, it can be kind of I know, it can be a big thing, so.
So the ARP put out years ago in an article, 4 different bread recipes, traditional bread recipes. And someone gave me a copy of that years ago, and that's what we used one of the ones out of that. So when the elder argued with me, I said, fine, we'll just do this. Everybody uses the same recipe. Well, that wasn't good enough either. Because we do the same thing the same way. And everything. People will argue about anything.
But that's what you get for meddling in things that aren't your business. But anyway, other questions? Did I answer your question, Ken? I mean, that's a great example of where I don't care which lane, it needs to be in somebody's lane. Probably not the minister's lane, but in some cases it might be. I like to cook. I might, nobody else bakes bread. I can do it, maybe. I don't know. Alex,
I'm changing the subject.
go ahead. You don't want to talk about baking bread and communion anymore? I'm shocked. Okay.
We haven't even talked about wine yet.
No, just,
Stop. I'm already getting enough trouble excited about that, but go ahead. Alex, go ahead. All right, obviously someone doesn't drink wine, but go ahead, Alex.
When I came to French camp, they had a unicameral system. The elders and deacons have been merged into one board. Since we ordained the board of deacons, has it been 4 years, 5 years? I lose track of time. But these guys can tell you differently, but we're still in the process of combing through duties and saying, y'all do this, we do this, that sort of thing. Would you have any counsel for a church that is either unicameral, thinking about it, or moving out of it, or still in it?
I know from a personal experience, there have been times that I've actually just cried out to the Lord, why did you make deacons? I don't, it's been hard sometimes to function, to get those guys to function like I think they should, because the session always wants to do it. Having that conversation again and say, where do we need deacons? So that we can be better elders. Because that's Act 6, right? The reason the deacons are there are to take away responsibilities from the session so that the session can do what the session is supposed to do. Not so that they don't have to work, but they have free time to do the spiritual things.
Kyle, most cases, I'd say in this group of men, the guidance for performance of responsibilities for an elder or deacon usually comes from the pastor. And it's good to have that because he's familiar with the fog and he's familiar with the duties of each office. sometimes when it gets blurred, in my experience in dealing with it on the minister's work and things, is where the issue is with the pastor and the session or the diaconate not knowing the direction they should go to get a resolution or at least start a resolution for that problem. Do you have any words of advice on that? You said go to the presbytery. That's what the pastor does.
Yeah, I think
Where
one thing.
where does the session go when they have a problem with their pastor?
I'm gonna give you an informal answer first. The informal answer is that you have relationships with people in your presbytery.
Yes.
So you've got people that you know that you can go talk to and say, look, we're having this issue, keep this in confidence, but we need advice. You gotta be very careful who you do that with, right? There's some people you don't talk to. You love them, but you don't talk to them. There's others you talk to and you know that you can trust their advice, trust their confidence. And that happens a lot. That's just an organic thing, right? I get called, I'm principal clerk, I get calls all the time. We're having issues here, what should I do? And I'm like, I don't know. You know, tell me about the problem a little bit more. That's the informal thing.
Okay, good idea.
The formal is, you call up the chairman of your minister's work and say, we're having a problem, I need some advice. Now I understand there's a difference there, right? They're both kind of informal to some degree, but when you call minister's work, that's a whole different thing than calling a buddy, okay? Does that help? Does that answer your question?
That's exactly what I was.
I want to go back to Alex real fast. Did I answer your question, or I don't feel like I did?
Not totally, but that's okay, you don't need to go
I would say this,
on. Can I add,
what,
are there any unicameral,
my
systems here?
Hickory Grove Church was unicameral for a while, then we added deacons.
I'm just curious, yeah.
I think the key is you want to add those duties to the deacons slowly. So whatever it is really you need the deacons to do, that's most primary, I'll get them to do that, I'll teach them how to do that well, and then add. I wouldn't just say, here are the 18 things you need to be doing. And then sort of train those deacons up, prepare them to go forward, make sure they can handle that load, because you don't want to discourage those guys either, right? Charles?
This may be a question you just want to overrule. One, maybe any progress on the commission, or when the deacons will start coming to the center.
There's no commission on that now. The study committee is only doing the work of the deacon. It does not handling female deacons. That was already defeated last time.
Is this meeting going to deal with other than deacon or male or female?
It's going to deal with the work of the diaconate as a whole, which I honestly think is a precursor to, if we're going to have the debate about female deacons, we need to understand what deacons do and not just say one side or the other. We need to have a good debate on that. Is that neutral enough of an answer? Kent?
You discussed previously chairmen of organizations like Sunday School, Christian Education. Is that something that you've really worked with in the past? You've had specific people report to the session about what they were doing?
Can I just give you my personal opinion about committees in the church? That often what we intend to be something to help the work of the church go forward becomes places where the work of the church goes to die. And they become impediments. One of the things I told my church at Lancaster all the time was, I want us to have enough organization to keep us on the rails, but not much more. Because the more heavy the structure, the more the bureaucracy, the less ministry gets done. And the less that one person with an axe to grind can stop good things from happening. Especially if the session is really agreeable, which a lot of ARP is pretty agreeable, right? We don't want to hurt somebody's feelings. Well, Alex doesn't want to do that, so let's just hold off on that. You gotta be careful with that. I may be dealing with the church, I am dealing with the church sort of that way, that I've had to go through 18 layers of bureaucracy. The deacons have got to talk about it. The session's got to talk about it. Christian Ed has to talk about it. Stewardship has to talk about it. The finance committee has to talk about it. I'm like, you have a stewardship and a finance committee? Yes. Can we just get an answer? This is not that hard. And one of the things is, if you're gonna have committees, they got to do something. They can't just sit around and talk about ministry. They've got to do it. We had a committee at our church. We called it the MORE Committee, I think it was called, Missions, Outreach, and Evangelism. And with an R in there somewhere. Anyway. And we would go to these meetings. We had 3 great meetings. All these ideas were thrown around. And in the meeting, we're like, well, let's pray about this more, and we'll come back next month. After the 4th month, guess what happened? Everybody stopped coming. Because people don't want to waste time talking, they want to do. That might be, that's a freebie.
Amen.
I'm not a committee guy. I'm not a policy guy. The things that we have to have policies on, all for that. But having a policy for who has to turn on the lights, that's just crazy. If your policy book is this big, you need to get rid of some policies. Now, you might disagree with me, that's fine. But I take Robert E. Lee on this. Robert E. Lee, when he went to Washington College, they had a big, thick book of rules. And they were proud of that. You know what Robert E. Lee did to it? He threw it away. He said, every cadet, every student will act like a Christian gentleman. And that was the standard. That's a whole lot easier to figure out than it is policy. And then if you have a bunch of policies, you'll have a bunch of budding lawyers trying to figure out how to get around the policy, right? Do we have any lawyers in here? No lawyers? Praise Jesus. There we go. All right, well, I think we're at a break. It's 11 o'clock. When do we have lunch? Right?
I think we're planning for noonish.
Okay, so let's take a quick break here, 5 minutes, and hopefully it'll be 7.